thanks to the Senior Center for hosting us. We do this every second week of the month, and it's called Bainbridge Remembers Oral Histories. So it's listening to our Bainbridge Islanders share stories from their experience and giving you a chance to hear different perspectives. And so I'll introduce today, but I want to start by the way we always start, which is the land acknowledgement statement. Every part of this soil is sacred in the estimation of my people. Every hillside, every valley, every plain, and every grove has been hallowed by some sad or happy event in days long vanished. Written, said by Chief Seattle in 1854. The people of the clear salt water, the Suquamish people, they live in harmony with the lands and the waterways along the Washington Central Sailor Sea as they have for thousands of years. And here the Suquamish live and protect the land and waters of their ancestors for future generations as promised by the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. Very grateful to be on Suquamish territory. So today, it's April, and in April is Arbor Day, as well as it's there's Earth Day and Earth Month. And so I've invited the two guys that I feel like are tree whisperers. One is Olaf, and one is Tom, and I'm gonna let them briefly introduce yourselves. So just at first, kind of say your name and who you are and what you do, and then we'll get into the stories, okay? So briefly, I'll start with Tom, just briefly your name and what you do.
My name is Tom Mueller, and I've lived on Bainbridge for 25 years now, and I'm retired. I work for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for 34 years.
Olaf, do you want to introduce yourself?
Okay. My name is Olaf Ribeiro, and I recently retired at 82, and I'm enjoying retirement. But before that, I traveled the world saving ancient trees and locally saving trees, and also as a plant pathologist helping nurseries solve their problems.
Yes, thank you. Very honored to have you. So Tom, earlier, if you can unmute yourself, he's working on it. Okay, so earlier we were mentioning how to spell your last name. So I just want to ask you, and then maybe turn it to Olaf. Do you have a story you want to share about your name?
Oh my, yeah, a lot of people ask me my name. I have a Portuguese East Indian name, and I grew up in Kenya to follow things up. So yes, I have the Olaf part is Portuguese and Ribeiro, but I grew up in Kenya. So, but I look very East Indian, although both my parents were Portuguese. I mean, my grandparents.
Great. Yes, I have to say what I'll say is that's a yummy story. So Tom, do you want to mention something about your name? And then we do want to know, what about you? When did you move to Bainbridge, and have you lived in other countries?
Well, my name is German, Mueller, without the E, and it means miller, which is lumbering and stuff like that. It's the most common name in Germany and Switzerland. So, and St. Louis, if you look at the phone book. I was raised in Missouri, in a small town south of St. Louis, and I transferred out to the University of Washington in 1968 and fell in love with Seattle. So I've pretty much been out here, except for about a 2-year period when I went to Europe for 6 months and just wandered around. So but I love being out in Seattle area. And then we moved here to Bainbridge in 1995. So I started getting into the historical museum because Teresa Cosgrove and I worked together a long time at the Corps. And so you got to come volunteer, Tom. So I did. I'll turn it back to you, Katie.
And so, yeah, Teresa Cosgrove was the executive, ended up being, after she worked with you, I guess, ended up being one of our executive directors at the Historical Museum before Frank Helm. So then I was just wondering, Olaf, how did you get involved in trees? How did your career in trees start?
Actually,
what was your interest? How did your interest go?
you know, I always loved the trees in our garden in Kenya. And then when we came here, I never had that opportunity because I went to school in University of California, Riverside, where all you saw were date palms. But then when we moved up here to Bainbridge in 1982, I got fascinated at the variety of trees and the beautiful big trees. So I started looking at them, and then I found out that very few people knew how to treat big trees and how to save big trees. So I decided to help, and it became bigger and bigger and ended up worldwide and nationwide.
So say that again. So you found out that there were very few people who knew about big trees. Is that what you said?
No, I said there were so many big trees when I came to Bainbridge. And then I realized that very few people knew how to save them. They just chopped them down if they thought they were dangerous or unsafe. And then at the same time, I had a lot of local nurseries and nurseries across the nation ask me to solve their problems in the greenhouse. So I had this two things, but my first love was trees. And then when I got involved, people started hearing about me, and I gave about 3 seminars at 3 different times in Britain to the arborists there. And then I ended up doing a talk in Hungary, and I can't remember any more places I went. But yes, and then in Kenya, I got them riled up, and now they have a beautiful tree-lined streets and with signs to say why these trees are important, and it's worked well.
In Kenya?
Yeah.
That's bigger than on Bainbridge. That's a huge, huge impact to have that wonderful explanation for people in a whole country. That's a wonderful commitment.
Yeah. So it's worked well, and the people in Kenya first didn't believe me, but when things really took off and they saw how beautiful trees could be lining their roads, they had me come back and they planted a tree in my honor, and I hope the tree is still alive.
Well, that's it. So Tom, let me know how you got involved in trees. You're, did you say a geologist?
No, I have a degree in oceanography.
Oceanography, okay. Well,
So,
there's not exactly trees in the ocean.
no, but I was from Missouri, and the way to get out of Missouri is to study oceanography at the University of Washington. But I was raised on a farm, and we had 180 acres, and half was woods. And when you're a farm boy, you're out in the woods all the time, hunting squirrels or whatever. And hunting squirrels, it makes you just sit there, and you look at all the birds. So I took up bird watching, and we rarely got a squirrel, but it was fun just being in the woods. But when I moved here to Bainbridge, we bought a really established garden over on Crystal Springs Drive, and so we started taking care of it. And I had to learn all kinds of stuff. And one of the things I decided to learn was how to make hard cider, because we had fruit trees, both pears and apples. And I kind of got a book on it and started learning about it. And then I started talking to other people, commercial people like Eagle Mount people and stuff like that over on the peninsula. So I have really gotten into cider. In fact, that's how I met Olaf. A mutual friend, Tammy Meter, introduced us to each other, because at that time I had grafted about 20 different kinds of apples onto a real old Gravenstein tree that we had here on the property. It's over 100 years old. And so she said, Olaf, you got to meet Tom and see what he's doing. So that's how we met.
Oh, that's how you met, is through Tammy?
Right.
How did that first meeting go?
Well,
the cider kept me going all afternoon. And I thought this was a great place to be.
Yeah, I'm making different kinds of ciders and getting into different varieties of apples and heirloom apples and everything else. So it was fun to imbibe a little bit with Olaf.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
A lot of fun. Good way to bond.
Yeah.
And ever since then, you two have been going back and forth about a lot of trees on Bainbridge.
Yes.
Olaf, I was wondering, what do you think the most famous tree or trees you've worked on is? Is it those ones in Kenya? Are there other famous trees?
Well, I worked on some really old trees in Britain, an 1800-year-old chestnut. I forget. Dogwood. Anyway, it was a chestnut tree, and it's spread now. Its trunk is spread 21 feet across the yard, and they called me to look at it and see if anything was wrong and what I could do about it. And that was a difficult tree to work with, because it was way out in the middle of nowhere. And then the other one is the Doomsday oak, under which the Magna Carta was written. That's a really interesting tree to look at.
Wow. Those are both really famous. Man. So then Tom, in your hard cider story, what are some of the most unusual ciders that you've created?
Well, I actually found out that there was a Northwest Cider Society, and they said, and I called the guy up on Bash Island to join, and he says, well, give $50 to the Western Washington Fruit Research Foundation up at Vernon on the WSU facility up there. And they were doing backyard fruit trees and testing to see what varieties grew well and everything else. So I went up and joined, and I learned, oh my God, I can graft, onto a single tree and get all kinds of apples. So I became kind of an apple historian, and they have a spring cell where you could get the rootstock that you could graft, what they call scion wood off, and that you could get 50 different kinds of apples that you could start. So I started grafting different varieties, and right now my oldest variety is one from 1200. It's called Pendragon, from the time of King Arthur. It's not quite as old as the Doomsday tree, Olaf, but
yeah,
pretty nice.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So, and one of the things I do is I really help people select trees. There's a fruit tree club here on Bainbridge. Every fall, he would have me come over and bring samples of my ciders, and sometimes I would bring different varieties, and they could taste the difference between varieties. And so I call it learning how to make backyard cider.
Wow. Well, It just, I mean, I'm thinking about when you're making a cider and you're trying to fine tune different things, does it have to do with which apples then you choose, or do you do other fruits as well?
You know, I've done Asian pears and European pears, but they're not variety. There's not a lot of variety in those. But apples, true hard ciders made with 4 different types of apples. They're called sweets and bittersweets and bitters and sweet bitters and stuff. And they're special varieties. And England has the most of them. France has a lot. I've used varieties that you can both, make pies out of or make, eat, but they also are good in cider. But I have the best apple from England called the Bramley seedling, and I have probably the first apple called the Rhode Island Greening from 1690, and they're both fabulous apples, both culinary wise, but also for making cider. But I 5 or 6 different varieties of apples that I put in each blend.
Sounds like a magician.
Sure
So,
does.
it being Earth Month, I was wondering, what does Earth Month mean to you, Tom? And what do you think is significant about how it links to trees and then to Bainbridge Island in general?
Well, I at the University of Washington, the first Earth Day took place in 1970, and being in the environmental part of the school, it really meant a lot to me. And frankly, it's turned into really more than trees. It's even gotten into climate change in modern times, and especially this. And being an oceanographer, I realized that the oceans really control the weather out there, hurricanes and everything else. Very important. And I have friends in the agriculture business that can't grow oysters because the oceans got too acidic and everything. So I'm really one of these oceanographers or environmentalists that try to look at how everything fits together. So trees are so important because of what they do with carbon dioxide, and that's probably the most important function to me. Although on Bainbridge Island was the first industry, the 2 mills that we had on that island really is what everybody that here worked on the mills at Fort Blakely or over at Meigs, Fort Madison. But, he's been a tree hugger. Not afraid to say that. It means so much to me, and I'm willing to talk to about why it does that. So I'll turn it over to Olaf.
Olaf, can you tell us what Arbor Day means to you and what it is?
Arbor Day I don't know, for the last 50 years or more, I got involved with Arbor Day. I was so excited when I found there was an organization that saved trees. So I got closely involved with them. And I tried for many years to start such an organization on Bainbridge, but it didn't work. And until lately, when I got a good group of people who were real tree huggers, and in the last 5 years, we really got going. And I think we got a really good group heading Arbor Day on Bainbridge.
Is there a way for people to join your group?
Oh, yes. Arbor Day is easy. You just call the Arbor Day Foundation and you can join there. But locally, yes, you can join through calling the people at Sustainable Bainbridge. Kristen, what's the name, last name? Anyway, they're the ones that would gladly help you join Arbor Day.
Maybe if anybody has the Sustainable Bainbridge link, they can put it in the chat for everybody else. That would be great.
Yeah.
So let's see. So one thing that I didn't even know about Arbor Day until I came to the Historical Museum and helped organize tree walks. So you very generously have been doing usually 4 tree walks every April for us, which has been something that people really look forward and have always been very popular. And so I wonder, do you have any favorite trees on Bainbridge that you'd like to share? If you had 3 favorite trees on Bainbridge, which would you pick today? I know they probably change, but which would you pick today?
You're on the spot. I just love every tree, and now
That's true.
you're going to insult all those trees if I point them out to the wrong.
Okay, then how about if I reframe it for you and say, considering this is for the Bainbridge Island Historical Museum and the Senior Center, which 3 trees can you tell us about?
You know, besides the trees at the Historical Museum, which are quite a history in themselves, and
why don't you tell that history a little bit, just because I don't want to assume everybody knows it.
When I came to the island in 1981, and it was autumn, and I was driving by the museum. No, at that time the museum wasn't even there, and there was a pet store. And I was driving by, and the red oak was magnificent. I looked and I said, this is the most beautiful tree. And when I saw the other 2, the sycamore, and I said, how can they put down concrete all around this and have a parking lot where right over the roots? So I found out the trees belong to the city because that area belonged to the city. So I got the city to let me break up the concrete by hand. We were 12 people, I think, who worked on that. And then we found out the pet store was moving, which was great. Then we could really work on those trees. And then I got the history of the trees, where they came from. They came from Kew Gardens in Britain. And I had the handwritten notes from the guy who brought the trees. His mother, I think it was, she was in her 70s, but she knocked on my door one day and said, here is the history of those trees. And I said, oh, this is great. Now I can really get on the city to save them. So we ended up saving them, but it was quite a story having to go before the city. But Charles Schmidt and Bob Connolly were really helpful. They were the 2 backups I had at the city council. So those were the 3 that, I have fond memories of. And then I started finding other trees that on the island that, had histories of different kinds. People would come up to me when they saw what I was doing, measuring the tree and things. They would tell me a little about the history of those trees. So it ended up that I got to know quite a few trees on Bainbridge, more by default than wanting to find out. and then, of course, the ones we moved, the trees, the cherry trees, when they said they couldn't be moved in the heat of the summer.
Which cherry trees? Now, where were these and why should they be moved?
Oh, these were the trees planted by the first Japanese students at the high school. And when they were expanding the high school, putting in the new auditorium, they were going to destroy these trees. And I had the Japanese community come to me and said, could you save these trees because they mean a lot to us? I said, I can. It's going to cost a lot of money. And I need the principal to agree. And he refused. But eventually he agreed when Jerry Effendahl and myself went to a school board meeting. And you know how Jerry Effendahl is. So we ended up, he gave us permission, but only that weekend. So I had to get a crew from Seattle, and they got here at 7 in the morning. And we worked and we moved them to Sakai. And Kate Sakai was so happy that we saved those trees. Tears were running down her face. She said, "This is the happiest day of my life, that people remembered my dad." And so we moved those trees, but it was quite a deal because I didn't realize how big the span was of the trees. So we blocked the roads, and the police were not too happy. And then when we got to the turn to get to Sakai, the power lights above the signals, we couldn't get under the signals, so I had to call the lighting company and say, "We need you to turn off the power here." And they said, "Sure, put in a request, we could do it in 2 weeks." And I said, "No, I'm right under the lights." And they said, "It's not possible." And then I said, "Would you talk to the Channel 5 news that's here?" And in I think 10 minutes they appeared and made a big deal of how they always help the community. So I said, "That's great. At least we got there." So that was the first one, because we had a lot of episodes getting it up there, and turned out there was no water on that hillside. And I tried to tap into the fire hydrant, and the fire chief wasn't happy. He said, you can't walk, just turn on the fire hydrant." I said, "But, well, I'll have to tell the TV station here that we're stuck at the last possible minute." And next thing I know, he said, "Go ahead." He gives me his private phone number. If anybody makes any deal, but you go ahead and do what you need to do. So I said, "Gosh, I don't think I want to do this again." But I ended up doing that again with another tree from downtown, the one that's in front of BPA that turns about 4 different colors. That maple it's one of the very rare maples in the U.S. And it was sitting there, and Bob Connolly just loved it. And they said, "No, it's up to the developer." And the developer said, "No, he can't wait for us to move the tree." But after we got together with the city and things, they finally agreed. And that one was fine. And again, when we were moving it, we realized it was going to block the Erickson Avenue. So Debbie Wenzel, who was a city council member at that time, brought her big car and laid it across the road and raised the hood like she had problems with the car, and gave us enough time to get around there and get the tree to the city hall. Anyway, I've had a lot of episodes with moving trees. It turned out it isn't too easy. But the first one, the trees at Sakai, the cherry trees, when I said I can't move them because it's going to cost about $25,000 to move the trees, a lady came and knocked on my door and gave me a cashier's check for $25,000 to move the tree. That Cooley, what was her name? Anyway, I was astonished. She said, "I love trees, and you're going to move those trees." I said, "Fine. This is great." So anyway,
So great. Wonderful. These are wonderful stories. And yes, you do have so many episodes. And I know you wrote a whole Bainbridge tree book that you generously donated to the Historical Museum to benefit. And we have a stack of them at the Historical Museum. And so are some of these stories in there, or is it more of a technical book, or do you tell these fun stories?
I told some of these fun stories in between the book, all the ones from saving the Nikai cedar tree at the at the bottom of, oh, where is that?
Taylor Avenue, the
Yes, yes, down there. And it was totally eroded under. You could see that it was going to topple. So at that time, we got a crew together, got there at 7 in the morning, and we worked all day to shore it up. But I found out one thing when the barge came in with the rocks, and we kept putting the rocks in wheelbarrows to wheel them up to the tree. Not a good idea when it's sandy and you have 100-pound rocks in a wheelbarrow.
Right. Whoops. And that tree is also nicknamed the witness tree because that's the cedar that witnessed
Yes.
the Japanese American
Yes.
neighbors
Yes.
leaving, being forced off the island.
That's
So
right.
yeah. So I was wondering if I could ask Tom, do you have a tree or two that's your favorite on the island or that you would want to bring up and share before we go to some of the questions?
You know, I do, and it involves Olaf. Olaf and Trainer were going to go over to Day Road to look at a tree that's on the Cosgrove owned the property. And Stephen was an old Apple guy who helped out in orchards when he was a teenager. So anyway, I said, can I come over with you and see you guys estimate the age of this tree? And so I had a friend from California that was visiting at the time. So we came over and we get there, and Olaf, who knew about my ciders, says, Tom, we shouldn't really measure this tree until we have some cider. And I looked at it and I said, well, what flavor would you like? Because I had a cooler with about 4 different kinds of ciders in it. So we all imbibed it. And then we went over and we measured the girth of the circumference of the tree at about breast height. And we looked at how gnarly it was. And they brought out their formula for how to figure out how old it was. And so they came to the conclusion, Jim and Olaf, that it was probably planted in 1865 to 1870.
Wow. Yeah.
So that, and Stephen had really done a good job of pruning it. So it was pretty healthy. I got some scion wood off of it, and I started a tree about 12 years ago. I started 2 of them, one on my property, and I planted the other one by the flagpole at the Historical Museum. And there were apple trees around, so I figured it could be pollinated by the other apple trees because apple trees don't pollinate themselves.
Yeah.
But then they tore out apple trees in the parking lot, so I had to start grafting varieties onto the Gravenstein apple to pollinate it. And so I put about 8 different kinds of apples on there.
Wow.
I've got my 2 oldest ones is one that Pendragon 1200 I put on 2 years ago. Okay. And I found a guy, Derek Murphy on the island, he's the president of the Fruit Tree Club. He wanted to put a Olympia apple, and I'd never heard anything about that. And Katy, those guys said, no, only Tom can touch that tree. So I knew him, so he gave me some scion wood, and I put 2 grafts onto it. They both lived. So, and then one lady said, I really like Northern Spy. I had them when I was a kid, so I put one of those on for her. So my goal is to have that tree have about 10 different varieties of apples so that it blooms at different colors. And
yeah.
And I've actually, the last 2 years, there's been about 100 apples, mostly Gravenstein on it, and I've made hard cider out of them. So and I added some ginger juice to it, so I've got some really nice ginger Gravenstein apple cider in my basement for people to use. So that's my favorite tree.
Yay. Well, goodness, I have the privilege of being on the site that has both of your favorites included. That's so great. I have a question here. I have a couple last questions to ask you before we wrap up, but I have some questions from some of our listeners. And one question, I don't know if either one of you know the answer to this, but she says that I am seeing signs saying, save the Grand forest.
Mhm.
Why is that? Is there a threat? Do either of you know? If you don't know, I'll go to the group, maybe might know, but do either of you know? Olaf, have you known why there might be a Save the Grand Forest sign?
They want to
Oh,
cut,
you know.
They want to cut a wide path through the forest for bikers to use recreation, and they're going to, clear cut so many trees, putting in the bike path, that a lot of people are furious about it. So there's a petition going around, and hopefully they'll be sensible enough, because once you open the forest like that, which has been sheltered, we're going to lose a lot more trees. It won't be the grand forest. It'll be the clown forest.
Oh, the glum forest. No, we can't have the glum forest. We need the grand forest. So you're saying that once you clear cut a
Yeah, once you open a forest like that, you start bringing in diseases like laminaria and a couple of other root rots that just like light to take off. So once you start open the forest and they get more light, you're going to see a domino effect, and they don't realize that. So, before long, we destroy a beautiful forest.
and who is the who are there? I know bicyclists have a nice
Yeah.
big group, and there's incredible, like when I first moved back here, I couldn't believe how many people are on their bikes in the middle of the rain, in the middle of the winter. So we have really enthusiastic bicyclists. I'm going to assume this is bicycle and not motorcycle, because motorbikes, because I think Bainbridge would not go for that. But what does anybody, is there anybody on the call, or do you know why they need that path? Is it a matter of, are they claiming safety or just more?
I just got this petition from Tammy Meader yesterday, and I was shocked. And I said, this can't be right. She said, yes, that's what they decided. I said, that would be awful. So they can stop it before too long, because otherwise there goes the grand forest.
Mm-hmm. I see. So I've got a feedback that there are mountain bikers, and the mountain bikers want more challenges on the island. So that's one of the constituents. And there's some background that Amanda has put in the chat. So that's really great. I have another question too. Is that in your book that's at the museum, could somebody find the tree measurement formula in your book?
Oh, no, I didn't put it in my book. I didn't even think of that.
Okay, well,
there's always a revision. I've had several people, including Jerry Alfendahl, telling me about a lot of things I should have put in the book. So I said, yes, I have to publish the book before everybody tells me what I should have put in it. So
for apple trees, you take the circumference at 4 feet high.
Yeah.
Divide that by 3 in inches and divide that by 3.14 and then multiply by 5. And then you look and see how gnarly it is, to if it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can only do that with standard apple trees, not semi-dwarf.
Yeah.
But
that's the formula. You do that, and then there's a chart for each species of tree. Sometimes you multiply by 2, sometimes by 4.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Is there would the Arbor Day people have that chart somewhere on their website possibly? Like, is there a good resource that one of you know, or I could go ahead and talk to you later about it, and we could see if we can send it to people?
I don't know. I know the Arboricultural Society of Arboriculture, they have it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Katy, I may have a copy of it in my numerous
Okay.
apple trees too. I've got the list of all the different varieties of trees and what the multiplier
Yeah.
is.
Okay.
Variety.
Mhm.
Super.
Mhm.
Super.
Someone has a raised hand. John?
Yes, just for the group, the formula to compare the largest trees, if you're going for trees in the record book, is you get 1 point for each inch of diameter at diameter breast height, which is 4.5 feet above the ground. 1 point for each foot of height that the tree has, and 1 point for the width of the crown where it intersects the ground line. So that's the universal formula for measuring large trees. It has nothing to do with age. So just for the good of the order.
Good of the order.
I know that the city, the review had a contest years ago, maybe 15 years ago, and you could submit your tree to be the biggest one,
Yes.
or those standards on Bainbridge Island.
Yes. You know, the history when I first came, the biggest maple tree I'd ever seen was by the high school, and the kids used to smoke behind it because it was so big you could hardly look around it. And when I put that in the Bainbridge review, that I think that's the biggest tree on Bainbridge, someone went and cut it down, and he said, now you can put my name saying I'm the guy who cut down the biggest tree on the island. So after that, I never mentioned, I just would take these notes and keep them to myself.
This is a really great little point to make, which is that was one thing that I found very interesting when I moved back to Bainbridge is there's kind of some secrets about where trees are. And at the Historical Museum, people would come and say, well, where are the old growth? Is there any old growth? And I would ask the docents, and they'd say, yeah, there is, but we don't let people know the location. So hopefully one day the culture of Bainbridge will change so that we know that if we expose old growth or old trees, that in the name of Olaf, we're not going to cut them down.
Yeah, it's sad, but you know, you never know how people react to any one thing. You know, I've met those who just hate trees and others who just want me to do everything to save a tree. So you never know.
What's the best argument for cutting down a tree, Olaf?
What's the best argument for cutting down a tree? There is no argument because every tree can be saved. You know, people are afraid of a really big tree, but if the roots are strong enough, they should have no fear of it ever coming down. And so it's just a question. But when they do this building sites and they chop all the roots and leave the tree, I said, what's the use of leaving the tree? It's going to topple because you've taken off half the roots, you know, and the city has no regulation like Seattle and Bellevue and all those places. They have very strict regulations against damaging tree roots during development. And they require an arborist to be on site to make sure that they comply. So that's those areas are really good.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about that for the future because I think there's just a general wash of assumption that we're all tree huggers here.
Yeah.
And you know, if you get if that, you know, we're not all anything. So it's good to recognize the ways to protect trees like that. I know Connie, did you have a question? Excuse me. I'm sorry, Ola.
Oh, I just wanted, I'm an Olaf fan. And I love listening to him, and I've listened to some of his discussions about different trees out in the area, and I've really enjoyed learning about it. The thing I like about it is that he takes his experience and his science, and he shows you why things are important. And instead of chopping trees down because they're in the way or they're not perfect, if they just don't look right for the designer or the landscaper, that's not a reason to cut a tree down. And so I really want to say thank you to Olaf, because he spent a lot of years working on behalf of nature, and has really encouraged us all to see the beauty in it, in the beauty in nature. And I'm a tree hugger because of him. So thank you very much, Olaf.
Thank you.
That's beautiful, Connie. I think that it's time to wrap up, and if anyone else has appreciations, that would be great. But that was a wonderful way to express what our Olaf, as many of you know, is one of our history heroes for the Historical Museum, and he's been so inspirational when it comes to preserving stories, not just trees, but the stories. Trees have stories that mean something to the community. And likewise, Tom has been having these as wonderful stories. And I'm so grateful for both of you and for each one of you that came today, and to the Senior Center for today's program.